My name is Tim Robertson. I publish My Mac magazine. Sounds more impressive than it is. It's mymac.com. Started in 1995, so in internet years, I'm like 82, somewhere around in there. In 2004, a friend of mine that I was communicating a little bit with via email, I was following his blog. His name was Adam Curry. He started this thing called podcasting. It sounded really cool. Sounded like a lot of fun. I kind of jumped in it with the thought that maybe one of my staff will take it over. They'll do the podcasting thing, and I'll just continue to write and edit their stuff. And it didn't really turn out that way. I kind of became the podcaster for our site. So is there anybody else in here that's an actual podcaster that's podcasting right now? Awesome. How many people are not podcasting but should be or want to be? All right. Podcasting is not that hard. You don't need the best equipment to get started. You're going to hear from a lot of other podcasters, a lot of experts in the field that says, buy this machine, buy this microphone. The trick is to start recording your voice and start podcasting, getting it out there. You have a free distribution method in iTunes. You don't have to host your own site. There's plenty of places out there that will host your audio files for you, so you don't have to worry about creating an RSS feed. A web page is going to be free. Hosting the file is free. Your distribution is going to be through iTunes. And then just start doing it. Don't worry about building your brand. Don't worry about getting an audience. Just start podcasting what makes it's exciting to you. Like you, for instance, you podcast for her, so she'll listen to it. Don't worry about everybody else in the room. If you can make your podcast fun and exciting, they're going to find you. Now, I had a little bit of an advantage because we get between, on average, 1 to 3 million people that hit our website a month to read our content, which is great. So when I started my podcast, I already had a big audience. Cool. We had a whole lot at first, then it went down, then it went up, then it went down. We get about 30 to 35,000 listeners per week. We have a weekly podcast. It's kind of funny because just doing a podcast by myself, kind of like I'm talking right now, I think sucks. It's much better when I had a co-host. Now I've got a couple co-hosts. And I get a lot of questions from our listeners. How do you guys record your shows? How do you do your interviews? You get some pretty big names. How do you get these people on there? And how are you having these conversations with co-hosts that's not sitting in the room with you? We use this little program called Skype. Skype sucks, by the way. It works, but it sucks. It crashes all the time. If you listen to any other podcast that do Skype, you'll hear the host complaining about Skype because it's horrible. But it's really your only other option right now is maybe iChat or AIM. Those suck too. So until the technology catches up to where we want it to be, Skype is pretty much the best quality audio-wise. So I have 2 hosts that come on with me every week. Guy Sherrill, and he's from Virginia, and David Cohen, he's from the UK, England. And we chat via Skype. Now, I record myself on a Mac using GarageBand. I recorded them, whatever they're saying in Skype, I record them in a program called Audio Hijack Pro. When the program is all done recording, I'll put them together. Sure, go ahead.
I think that maybe you should record yourself in Audio Hijack as well.
The reason I don't is because
it's slower.
It is slower. Well, you gotta have a good Mac. But I don't do that because I want to be able to put effects on them. And when I bring that into GarageBand, I can boost their volume. I can give them more compression so it sounds more like they're in the same room with me. When I record all 3 of us, I sound a lot louder because it's a live mic recording, and they're coming over Skype.
You can record yourself as, not to get technical.
I know, you can record yourself.
You can record
Okay. But it's easier if I've already got it open, then I'm just recording it that way anyway.
If you try call recorder,
Yeah, it didn't work that good for me. It crashed a lot.
have that better. And I can split.
You can split it, right. There's a lot of different ways you can do it. The other thing with Skype that I like is because we do a lot of interviews, and not everybody that we do interviews with is going to be on Skype. Kind of in contact with these PR companies that always want to get their rock stars on all these different radio shows, all the new podcasts, and they want to bring these guitarists from the band Korn in, and they're a Mac user and an iPhone user, so hey, perfect audience, they can come and talk about that stuff on our show and maybe sell a couple albums. So that's what they do. We use Skype to do a Skype out call or Skype in call, so I can talk to these people, record it on the computer, and try to clean up the conversation as best I can audio-wise because telephones suck. But here's the thing. A lot of people can't figure out how to get interviewees to come onto your show. And then when you get them on there, how do you ask questions and stuff? The easiest way to do it is to call people, to send email. Everyone's like, well, that doesn't work. Yeah, it does. If you know the person that you want to interview, I bet within 5 minutes of Google searching, you can find out who their PR company is, who their marketing company is. They'll take an email, they'll take a phone call, and you just tell them who you are. Hey, I'm Tim Robertson with the MyMac Podcast. I'd really like to get so-and-so on the show to talk about whatever it happens to be. They'll come on the show. Now, they'll try to get you to work around their schedule. I run into this all the time, especially rock stars. Like the guys from, who was it, Journey or Night Ranger, whoever it was. You know, well, he can only talk at this certain time. So I go, oh, okay, well, you know, maybe we'll get him the next go around then. Oh, wait a minute. What time works for you? And so you get these people to come in when it works for you, because I don't know about the rest of the podcasters in here. I don't do this full time. I don't know anybody who does podcasting full time. We probably all have regular jobs. We're trying to squeeze the podcasting into our life. You know, I've got 4 kids and a wife. I have to, you know, spend time with them. So I have to work podcasting in my schedule. So when we're going to do interviews, the guests have to come on when I'm doing the podcast. If they can't, oh well. They're the ones trying to sell something, I'm not. They want to come onto your show. So it's pretty easy to get guests. A lot of people ask me, how do you figure out what questions to ask? You can go to Wikipedia, check them out there, figure out what they like to talk about. It's not difficult. I like to have real conversations with people. A lot of the comments that we get on our podcast is, you guys don't come across like a radio show. You guys sound like a bunch of regular people talking, and you have interesting guests. You get a product manager from Adobe Photoshop, CS4, come on and talk about the new stuff. Now, a lot of people will get those kind of guests. The problem is they'll get on the shows and they'll just, the PR talk. Here's the new features, and it's really boring. We get guests on and we go, hey, what was the first computer you ever used? Why did you get a computer? We try to bring out the human element of these guests that a lot of other podcasts and radio shows don't do. They get guests on and it's just so boring. You know they're just there to sell. A real good example of how to do a podcast would be like the David Letterman show. The people will come on, they're going to cut their new movie, but more importantly, Dave's going to start asking them personal questions. And those are the kind of answers that you guys want to hear, right? That's what I want to hear when I listen to an interview. So that's kind of what I always focus our interviews on. There's another guy over here, though, that does a really cool, he's not listed on the schedule, but his name is Rick Stringer. Now, he has a podcast that's unlike almost every other podcast out there. And I think Rick should come up and talk a little bit about variant frequencies, because this is original content stories, stuff that you're going to see in movies soon. So, Rick, why don't you come up and talk about podcasting, how you got started? Yay, Rick!
Can I see a quick question?
Sure. We can do a QA when Rick's done.
Okay, go ahead.
Tim and I are buddies. We've known each other a long time. In fact, we've gotten to know each other through podcasting. Just to give you a little background on who I am and why Tim asked me to come up here. In 2005, I was just listening to podcasts like a lot of other people here are. And my wife and a friend of ours were in the process of trying to get their writing published. They both write sci-fi, fantasy, horror stuff. But they were having a hard time getting their work noticed. And so I came up with the idea at the time to say, well, why don't we podcast your stories? And at first they looked at me like I was crazy. In 2005, not many people knew much about podcasting. Finally, I won them over, and they said, yeah, we got a bunch of short stories, so we decided to start podcasting their short stories. And so that's when Variant Frequency was born in January of 2006. Now, I was going to talk a little bit today about the rule of 5, which I heard mentioned earlier by another speaker, which is real interesting because for those of you who don't know what the rule of 5 is, the rule of 5 is your first five podcasts are going to suck, and vast majority of podcasters quit before they get to their 5th podcast. I like to
clarify all my podcasts.
I like to think though that you don't have to have a bad podcast your first 5 episodes. In fact, our second one won an award. So we obviously were doing something. In fact, we've now won 3 awards for they're called Parsec Awards. They're for excellence in speculative fiction. And the whole point to Variant Frequencies, like I said, was to get their work noticed. And it has done exactly what it was supposed to do. I was not doing this to get rich, although getting rich, of course, would be nice. But the whole point to it was to get their work out there. And it's done that. They've both been published in various magazines now. Matt has 2 books out. One is part of where his story is part of an anthology. Another one is an entire anthology of just his stories, and almost all of them originally appeared in the podcast. And he's sold 3 screenplays, all of which are based on stories that appeared in podcasts. So obviously, podcasting works, and you can get your stuff noticed that way. If you're trying to make money in podcasting, sure, go ahead, try to make money, but don't get into podcasting thinking, oh, I'm going to get rich now that I'm a podcaster. You might, if you get lucky. There's a couple of guys out there that get lucky.
But you're not going to.
The vast majority don't. And if that's your sole purpose in getting into podcasting, you might want to think about trying to do it.
Podcasting is one of the very first times in human history that an average person like you guys has exactly the same reach as a huge media company. We have basically free distribution. We can make our own content. There's nobody standing above you saying, you can't talk about this. Now, I have a technology podcast. You have a creative type of podcast. But we can say anything we want to say. If I want to jump on my podcast and go, fuck, I can do it. My advertisers might not be happy. But my advertisers might not be happy with that. But you know, the advertisers aren't going to care if I have a big audience. They're not as...
Sometimes that's why they choose.
Some of them will actually choose me
It's all about
because
the
I
right
am.
advertising. Some
Exactly.
You're listening to the fuck.
But you don't have...
But the point is, we have the opportunity. This is a unique time in history. They're going to be writing books about the stuff that we're doing right now. Well, maybe not that. But what we're doing right now, they're going to be writing books on this 20 years from now. Twitter's part of it. You know, Facebook is part of it. But podcasting really is its own thing. It's not a conversation for the most part. You're not sending comments in most of the time. And it is much like traditional media in that you're sitting there and you're consuming it. But you're consuming it at your own pace. I put a podcast out there, you don't have to listen to it at 8 o'clock on Thursdays. You can listen to it any time you want, on any device you want. Go ahead.
Isn't it also true, though, that the way you can promote podcasts
Absolutely.
is through social media?
Absolutely. They work hand in hand, but they are definitely different. We promote our podcast through obviously our own website, but we use Twitter. And when I post something on Twitter, it hits my Facebook side. Occasionally on LinkedIn, I'll put something on LinkedIn about our show. We pick up some listeners that way. I'm a little bit unique in that I already had a built-in audience. Rick, for instance, had to build his audience from nothing, from scratch. Now, when Rick got into podcasting and when I got into podcasting, it was a much tighter community than it is now, I think. When Rick started his podcast, I was promoting the hell out of it on our show. And you don't see that as much as you used to, but it used to be podcasters would run ads for other podcasts that they liked, and vice versa. And that's how we built up an audience. You did it too much.
I think that's still going.
You think so?
Oh, yeah, we run other podcasts,
Yeah.
promos all the time. And that's another thing that many of us will do is we'll swap promos, so we're advertising for each other. Yeah, we do that regularly.
I still do it somewhat, but not as much.
Yeah, but no, we're always running stories in there. But another thing that's important is what Tim was saying about you can listen to it at your own time. That's the beauty of podcasting. If you've got a show that you're watching on television, of course we've got TiVo now, and make it a little bit easier. But for many people, if you had a show that you wanted to watch and it happened to conflict with another show, chances are you weren't going to see whatever this one show was. Podcasting, that doesn't exist. It's just a question of how much time you've got to listen to whatever podcast you want to listen to. Speaking of time, this is another thing that is kind of a personal feeling. Really long podcasts, you got to be careful. Depends on who your audience is, but like a single podcast that's an hour or more, I think that many people you're gonna limit your audience. To be truthful, that's just my personal opinion. Now there are others who are gonna disagree with that.
This is a verbal spanking, isn't it? Because ours keeps going over an
Times is
hour.
always real long. I just know for myself, if I want to listen to all the different podcasts, I want to keep them relatively short. I'm not saying they got to be 15 minutes or something like that. But I think there's kind of that threshold. When you start hitting an hour or more, your stuff better be damn good, or people aren't going to listen.
You get feedback. People will say, if you try a 20-minute show, try like an hour show, like, people will say like.
First time we went over an hour and a half, I got quite a few emails saying, dude, this is like a commitment. We're not married. I'm listening to you more than I'm listening to my wife, which necessarily isn't a bad thing, but that's a long show. And so we try to keep it down. But our problem is we enjoy podcasting so much, and the conversations that we get going.
Yeah.
For instance, on the last show we just did, I went on a huge rant against Macroll Online because they ran a review that was 90% nothing but PR copy and paste crap, and that much about the actual review of the product. And it pissed me off. I'm a publisher. We do a lot of product review. If you're going to say this is a review, tell me what's good and bad about it. Go into more depth other than what I can read on freaking Adobe's website. And they didn't do that. I've already got about 50 emails since the show went live last night from people saying, man, you're totally right. That's BS. And hey, have you looked at this guy's review? Have you looked at their review? So there is that kind of a conversation. And when we have these really heated debates or conversations and the show goes long, generally the audience will stick with us because they're into it too. Not too long ago, there was an app rejected from the App Store from Apple called Podcatcher. Podcatcher? Podcaster. It was rejected because it duplicated functionality in the App Store, and Apple didn't want to put it out there. And that's BS. There's nothing in the licensing agreement when you become a developer that says you can't develop anything that interferes with what we're doing. There's nothing about that. So we have this guy on the show. He comes on Skype. We have this nice interview with him, and we get his point of view across. We have one of our hosts playing devil's advocate a little bit. I'm more on the guest side saying this is bullshit. And it went really well. After the show went off the air, we told him, hey, you really should release this for the jailbreak community. And he did. So just by coming on our show, all of a sudden he was like, that's what I should do. And now he's making tons of money simply by being on a podcast. But the funny thing was, he was actually a listener of our show before we had him on as a guest. So he's sitting there listening to us talk about his product, and then I kicked the question to him. He was silent for a minute and went, oh man, I'm so used to listening to you guys in the car, I can actually talk back to you now. So he was used to listening to us in his car, and I'm asking him a question. He completely got lost in the conversation that we were having as a listener, and all of a sudden he's a participant. So if you start your own podcast or you have your own podcast and you're thinking about guests, don't think about just the big rock star guests that you might have or the big programmers. If you're a tech show, if you're a sports show, don't just have the sports guys come on and talk about it. I bet there's somebody in your audience right now that's listening that's going to make a great guest, maybe even a co-host. You never know. You might find the next great podcast co-host for yourself. Put the question out there to the audience. Would any of you like to be on the show? You will get emails. People love to hear themselves talk. People love to come on shows and talk about the subjects they're passionate about. That's how we got some of our co-hosts. David Cohen from the UK started as a listener of our show. We've had Rick on our show, but you started as a listener. He actually won a contest of ours, and that's how I met Rick. I sent him a brand new hard drive, and that's how I met Rick. We had him on the show, and hey, you're in Traverse City, Michigan, just like us, and we became friends. So you bring your audience, your podcasting audience, just like you would on Twitter, or your website, or your blog, or whatever, get more active with them. Ask them questions. Because unlike a blog, unlike Twitter, a podcast is something that's very personal to people. If they're listening to it on their headphones, chances are they can't hear anything else, and they're listening to you. And that's a very powerful conversation, even though it's one way. They're listening to you. Ask them to join in. Would any of you like to come on the show and talk? You know, you guys, my show's about a Mac and all things Apple related. Would anybody like to come on the show and talk about your first Macintosh experience? Because if you're a big Mac user, that's kind of a significant moment in your computing life. And we'll get email. People say, come on. Okay, this is how you do it. Use Skype, blah, blah, blah. Have them come in and talk to them.
Yeah, the question I wanted to ask you earlier. What interview podcast did you listen to before you started your own? And did you have a format in mind?
No,
or you
because
you said
when we started, there was really not very many other podcasts out there.
Is there your question was what's your first computer? And,
Yep.
Some of us listen to Podcast 411. That's always been his first question.
Sure.
And
What was mine? Mine was the Daily Source Code.
Oh, okay. Well, well, Rob. That's Rob from
Rob,
Podcast
right. I know.
411.
I've been on the show.
That's what I just wanted to know what interview.
Mine was the
podcast
Daily
you
Podcast, and he would. Adam Curry didn't do a whole lot of interviews and stuff, but he would have participants that would send him audio files like the quiz, where they would play just a snippet of a song, and he would try to figure out what it was, and it made it great. The problem with doing interviews nowadays is trying to figure out how you want to do it and how to schedule it. If it's your podcast, you really need to take ownership. This is when we're going to record, and we're going to use Skype, or we're going to use this. My most famous interview, we did an interview with Gil Amelio. He was the CEO of Apple Computer right before Steve Jobs returned to Apple. So I happened to read his book. And in his book, he actually lists his email address. So I sent him an email and I said, Mr. Amelio, I think you kind of got the short staff at Apple. I know the iMac project actually started under you, not Steve Jobs, even though he gets all the credit for it. I think that's BS. I just wanted you to know. And if you ever want to come on our podcast and talk about it, we'll give you a forum to do that. So on podcast, I want to say podcast 78 or so, he wanted to do the podcast. This was before Skype allowed you to make an outgoing or an incoming call. And because of who he was, we wanted to be more accommodating. I didn't want to say, well, you got to download this and fuck you if you don't want to, because this is Gil Amelio, as an ex-CEO of Apple Computer. We want to make this guy happy, plus he's extremely rich. And rich people get what they want. So all he wanted to do was have a conversation, but he wanted to do it on the telephone. So how do we do that on a telephone? Well, the only way we could figure out how to do it on such a short time frame, I had at the time, I got an iPhone now, but at the time I had one of those crappy little cell phones that snap open with a speakerphone. I literally held that in front of the microphone by that far, and we talked to him like that. So the audience could actually, when we listened to the conversation back, heard it a lot better than we did, because it's this speaker that's about the size of an ant's nut. That's about how big the speaker is. But the microphone was very sensitive and picked it up really well. It still sounded like crap. People didn't care because of the content was so interesting. People wanted to hear what this guy said, so they didn't care that, oh, it just sounds crap, I'm not going to listen to it. No, they're going to listen to it because they wanted to hear what this person says.
As a listener, I can say that was a great interview.
It was fun.
And the sound quality wasn't fun. That was a good example of where the content was more important than the tools.
Yep.
And you got to keep in mind, when he was doing with the phone, that was in the earlier days of podcasting. So obviously things have advanced just even in the last year on how people do it.
For those who haven't started your own podcast and you're thinking about it, you've got a much easier time of it than we did when we started. Half these technologies didn't exist, and we've had to adapt to them. And these things Skype is as bad as it can be. It's great for what we do. There's going to be something better probably in a year and a half to 2 years from now than what we're using right now. The microphones, the way you connect them to your computer, and the programs that will recognize those computers or those microphones without you having to put this driver in, put that driver in, and configure this, and configure that. All of that's getting taken care of now. Podcasting, the technology to actually do it, is so much easier. And what I want to see, what I really want to see, is more people podcasting. I think more people would succeed at it. I'm not talking about money. Money is important, don't get me wrong, I have some advertisers. We make a little bit of scratch on the podcast. But I didn't start the podcast to advertise. And I don't listen to other podcasts thinking, well, this person's trying to make money, so I should listen to a show. I listen to a podcast because I enjoy it. And I think a lot more people than currently are podcasting have some really great stories to tell, have some really great ideas for a radio show online, of us podcasting. So just do it. Just pull out that crappy mic that you already got, or the little headset with the little microphone that comes down, and record your podcast. And if it doesn't sound as professional as Leo Laporte's or Rick's, or it doesn't matter, just record it, get it out there. Even if you only get 5 or 10 people listening to it, you will get feedback if you ask for it. Hey, send us feedback at blah, 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 blah. And somebody that's listening to your podcast will do that. What really blew my mind when we first started doing the podcast, and it's a very insular thing when you're recording it. At the time, I was going over a friend of mine's house named Chad, because I've got 4 kids and he didn't, so that was a good place to do the podcast. We would sit down and we would record the podcast in front of his Mac, and then I would take that sound file back home, do a little bit of editing, get it posted via FTP and all that stuff. What happened was, for a long time, it's just Chad and I sitting this close together, and it was our show, and the audience was almost secondary. I mean, I knew people were listening. But most of the feedback that I was getting initially was people that I already kind of knew. I get this email from somebody, a really good point, I don't even remember what the gist of this conversation was, but he says, I was listening to your podcast this morning as I was riding the tube into London this morning. And I thought, wow, that's really weird, because I'm reading this at 7 o'clock in the morning. I posted this 10 o'clock last night. After I posted it, I went to bed. I'm sleeping. I wake up, I check my email, and someone on the other side of the planet, well, not quite, but you get the point. On the other side of the planet is listening to what I was saying at Chad's house, and he's commenting on it. And it was really powerful to me, and that's when I started realizing that podcasting isn't about just your small little demographic or where you live. It's literally global. I've had people on the show from Australia, United Emirates, I mean, really all over the planet. And it's, for us, we're talking about technology and Macs in general. But this could be about anything right now, because everyone's talking about change. This is an opportunity for anybody to reach out to a larger audience worldwide, or even on your next door neighbor if that's your goal. Just start recording the podcast. Don't worry about the music at the beginning. Don't worry about, oh, we don't have a theme so we can't do it. Just record it. If it's only 10 minutes, it's 10 minutes, but put the time in. Record a podcast, get it uploaded. iTunes is going to list it for free. It's not that, I don't want to say it's easy, but it's not that difficult. I guarantee you every single person in this room right now could podcast. Any questions?
You said you did something last night, you already had 50 people email you about it?
Yeah.
Do you respond to all of them?
Yes, I try to. There's times that I don't. I told a very off-color story when probably the first year of podcasting, 2005. I thought it would be a great idea to try to get the audience to know who Chad and I were. So I told Chad before we recorded, dude, yeah, big mistake. I said, dude, what we'll do is we'll tell a story from our childhood. And that will make the listener kind of know us more, and they'll feel an affinity. So he tells a story, which is pretty good. And I tell this story about how I killed a bat. And it was really a cruel story. But I was 18 years old at the time. I'm 38 now, so it was 20 years ago. So I tell this story about how we basically tortured and killed this bat. Funny story, I don't know if I'm going to it now, but it was actually funny. At least I thought so. And everybody I had ever told the story to is just cracking up. Yeah, she's going, oh my God, he killed that. So I tell this story, and Chad laughs his butt off. And the next day I get a couple of emails, except for one. And this person is really upset. I think you should burn in hell. And I'm like, whoa, geez, okay, no big deal. So, I move on. The problem is she posted a comment on a bat rescue mailing list. Now, I got the most vile, hateful email you could possibly imagine. I know where you live. I Google searched you. You're going to die. All kinds of really bad stuff. I knew I would, well, maybe, but nothing I could do about it. And it was just the most vile stuff, and I thought, shit, do I really want to do that again? I don't know if I should get personal like that again. Or if I do, you might want to use better intelligence and kind of stay away from too much controversy. But that's the kind of thing, that's the kind of risks you take. I responded to every single person that sent me hate mail. Most of them apologize for the real vile stuff, because it's really easy to send out a hate mail to this anonymous person, and these people didn't listen to the podcast, they don't know what I said. They're responding to what somebody else said about what I said. And when they found out that I was a real person, the biggest thing that I did was I said, well, I'm sure, at the time I only had 3 kids, I'm sure my children, Rachel, Brittany, and Brooke, would really miss me if you killed me. And they would respond, I'm really sorry. Because I became a person to them. When I respond to people via email after they listen to the podcast, it humanizes the connection, and they become more of a fan. I hate using the word fan, but I've actually had people, I'm your biggest fan. There was this, I think he was 12 or 13 kid in New Zealand who just sends me this weird fan mail all the time. And it's kind of creepy, but you know, I keep the people. He's halfway around the world right here. You got to keep that connection going with email. And if they take the time to send you something, whether it's an audio file, they call into your show if you have an 800 number they can call into, a Skype out number, or it's just a simple email. Really love your show, keep it up. Respond, because if you don't,
Remember what happened in The Incredibles with Buddy turning into Cinder.
Buddy got pissed off and became a villain because he was shunted, right?
We don't want to listen.
We got to wrap it. Anybody got any last questions?
Yeah, I've seen on certain podcasts where the actual the conversation.
Please just go these things.
Has been converted.
Yeah, that's a feature. Some applications, I believe it's an Adobe product, will start doing that now, Premiere Pro, which will actually give you a transcript of the show. But that technology is really kind of flaky. It's not there yet.
Here you go.
Anybody have any last questions for me or Rick?
I feel like this might be lengthy. I was just wondering, you kind of glazed over the advertising thing. I just wondered how you got advertising. I feel like
Because
a question
we-
a lot of people
Yep.
want to know.
Advertising, I'll make it quick. She's getting... Get off the stage. Yeah.
That's a whole separate.
Advertising, we already had advertisers on the website, so I already had a conversation with a lot of these companies. It was simply a matter of sending them an email. We do a Mac podcast. We kind of know who the advertisers of that show would be. It was simply sending them an email saying, would you like to advertise on the show? They'd say, how much? I'd tell them, and they'd go, or they would send us a check, one or the other.
Keep
That's
in
all it
mind,
really took.
he has an advantage in that he had already had advertisers with
Yes.
his.
But when I started podcasting, we had a huge advantage. We already had a lot of people there. But if I was just starting out, don't even think about advertising right now.
Right.
You know, a year and a half, 2 years down the line, if you've got over 20,000 listeners, then you can start thinking about advertising, contacting companies of products that you might want to advertise on your show, but otherwise, don't even bother with advertising. Thank you.